Hello everyone, welcome to the Gecko Talk podcast. My name is Ryan, and today we have a very special guest, Sam from Samsgeckos. How are you, Sam?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. How has everything been this year? I guess with COVID and all that.
That's a loaded question. COVID, distancing, fun. Definitely different.
Has it affected your breeding season whatsoever, or sales perhaps?
I have to say sales on mine is up, but of course no shows, so that's a little disappointing because I've just seen people and, working hand in hand with them and seeing who's purchasing the Gecko instead of just talking to them over text or over email.
Yeah. Hopefully next year, though. I know that the show I think it was the Super Show was canceled for January.
Yes, I did see that.
Hopefully, maybe spring or summer, there will be some shows up.
Crossing our fingers.
Yeah, I really hope so. Well, let's start with the questions then.
Okay, sounds good.
How did you get into breeding leopard geckos?
I first got into breeding leopard geckos was when I was in grade school. I went to a local fair, and it was a kind of a educational table, and they had several different species, and I held the leopard gecko and just fell in love with it. And then a few years later, when I got older, I decided that I wanted to purchase a leopard gecko, and I went to a kind of a mom and pop shop and got my first leopard gecko, which was a Murphy patternless, and then she produced eggs, which of course they're fertile, and so I decided I wanted to have little babies and produce babies and try my hand out, and looked into the morphs and decided which way I wanted to go and what I wanted to create. So I decided to get maxed out, and then it kind of progressed from there. Each year I added some more and more, and now I have a menagerie of them.
What stuff do you work with now? What stuff do you work with now? Is it just a small assortment, or do you work with a decent amount of morphs?
I do have a decent amount of morphs. Of course, I have all my favorites. The Murphy patternless, the blizzards, because my favorite color is purple. And then my other favorites are the Super Snow Clips. I really like the Pied book. And it's been pretty fun to work with those. Of course, the Black Knight.
Do you work with Trempers too, or just any of the albino strains?
I have the Tremper and the Bell. I have worked with the Rainwater in the past, but it's just not been a big market. And I'm not a big fan really of the Rainwater. I'm more like the Tremper. I mostly just do the one.
Yeah, that's good.
And then I have a few tangerines.
Do you want to work on to the second question now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Great.
Friends, back each time I'm like, oh, here. No.
Alright, so the second question is, what's your goal in this hobby as you continue to produce leopard geckos? What's your, your end goal for, producing them?
That's a little tricky because honestly, I'm not out to look for a production of leopard geckos, just mostly kind of bring the joy of my geckos to other people.
Yeah.
Share the joy that I get from the leopard geckos and having them. I like to pass that down to other people and then see their experience with the gecko that I produce and how much joy that it brings them. But if I do have to choose kind of production of what I want to produce morph-wise, I do want to produce more of the Black Knight, the darker Black Knight, and kind of play around with that since I do have the reverse stripe. and I'm gonna pair for this coming season, kind of see what that's gonna turn out like. And then, of course, I really like the super snow patternless, and work a little more with the giants, because I haven't worked with the giants as much. I've only been doing it, this will be my third season working with the giants. So produce more giants.
That's fun. I like that you're just doing it, though, for not only your own enjoyment, but just to share it, though, too, for others, you know. See how cool it is, just to produce geckos, though, too.
Yes. So my favorite moment, I have to share this. My favorite moment was when I had a customer that had purchased the gecko at the San Jose show, and they brought the gecko the next year for me to see how big she had grown and, you know, how well they've done with her. And that was like my ultimate goal. I didn't anticipate that happening, but it really brought me to tears to see this gecko, and the gecko actually recognized me. It was absolutely the coolest thing, I have to say, by far. That is exactly what I want in doing leopard geckos. That's my goal, is to show the joy and the passion that I have that I can share with others.
Yeah. That's awesome. A lot of people, like, will get into it, like, for the business aspect sometimes, and just breed for what's the next biggest morph. And, like, I like how you're just kind of in for it just because you enjoy it. And I think that's kind of rare, just kind of nowadays, I guess, in the hobby. There's not a whole lot of people out there that are doing it for fun.
I'm definitely not in it for the money. I mean, yes, it does help, you know, because it takes a lot to feed these guys, and the electricity and to house them. I mean, all the supplies and having to upgrade things and, you know, keep them happy and healthy. So it does help getting back a little bit, and what I sell the geckos for, it goes back into them. I'm not, you know, oh, I got this money and taking it out and going and spending it. It goes right back into the geckos. So
Yeah.
I definitely have to say I'm not into it for the money. Not that I don't like money, but it goes right back into them. I mean, you can't get into this business and think, oh, I'm going to make tons of money, because you're always going to have to buy something or, you know, upgrade, expand, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. That's good, though, too, because, like, I like having the same idea. Whatever you make from the geckos goes back into it. I just think it's smart for, like, managing yourself, though, too, with the money that you make from the geckos that you produce. But it also just kind of keeps it in check, like, you're doing this for the geckos and not for yourself, kind of.
Right. So it's like my PayPal account. Everything that gets purchased as a gecko goes through PayPal. It ends up sitting in there. And then when I need to order from Rainbow or, you know, buy dubias, that's when I, you know, pull the money out and use that. So I kind of make myself not use that money for anything but the geckos.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of how I've done it from the start. And then, of course, like, you know, everyone uses PayPal for purchasing, and, of course, Venmo now, too, but that's when I purchase a new gecko, it comes out of the PayPal, is because I've sold the gecko previously before, and then they can pay for the new gecko. But it all goes back into the geckos.
Yeah, that's good. Well, how about we move on to the third question now?
Okay.
How did you decide what morphs you wanted to breed and go forth with working on?
When I first started, it was mostly just the ones that I liked, and then progressed into more of what was more the popular, but I still was interested in them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now it still is mostly like my favorite morph that I try to breed, and then of course people have been asking for the giants, so I started getting more into the giants. I wasn't, not that I wasn't a fan of them, but I just had never had an interest of getting a bigger leopard gecko.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I have the giants, I really like them. So I've gotten more into them, especially because people have requested it, but more because I like, holding that bigger leopard gecko. It's just the appeal of it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, it's it's pretty funny because like the first stuff that I got though too was like giant stuff, and then I got so used to it, and then once I got a normal sized animal, I'm like, what's wrong with it? Why is it so small?
It does. They seem so tiny.
I just think it's the feeling of, or just like, I don't know. It's something about giant reptiles. I don't know. It just seems natural holding them, I guess, or something. And the other one just seems tiny.
It does. Also, the same gentle giant, they are very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
They're very easy to handle. I've noticed that a lot more of the males that I have that are giants are just like, oh, pick me up.
Yeah. Yeah, my male super giant, anytime I walk into my room, though, quickly runs to his tub and he's like, take me out, please, I want to hang out. They're just... I like the personality of super giants, though. I just think that they're... Not only are they, like, just super gentle, I feel like they're very, very active, too.
Yes, their temperament is... It's active, but also not as fast.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed. They're moving a little bit slower in a sense of, what's the word? They're more comfortable
Mm-hmm.
in themselves. They're not as scared. They don't get scared as frequently when you open the tub or the top of the lid of their tank. They don't seem as scared, as skittish either.
Yeah, they seem more laid back.
They are, yes.
Did you ever branch off into subspecies at some point?
Yes, I've had the Hardwicki for leopard geckos, the Hardwicki, and currently I have Montana and the Afghanicus,
Mm-hmm.
I believe is how you say it.
Yeah, Afghanicus and Montanus. That's cool. What made you want to get into those ones? Just after, was that just something after you had the morphs that you liked and just eventually just branched off into subspecies a little bit?
I wanted to look at the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the colors and the patterns of them. And just kind of wanted to try something a little different. However, though, the Hardwicki female was a little too aggressive for me. And I don't really like having any aggressive reptiles, especially breeders, so I kind of veered away from that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting though too, because like for breeders and stuff like that, it seems like their temperament almost kind of passes down to their offspring sometimes.
I've noticed that, but I've also noticed that with some of their geckos too.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an aggressive parent, typically half of them are going to be pretty aggressive. Not always, though, but I've noticed that it does pass down in the leopard geckos as well.
Yeah. And then, are your tangerines kind of skittish, too? That's just, I guess, a side question, because I've kind of noticed that tangerine-based animals seem a little bit more skittish.
The noir stuff is pretty calm. Even with the head noirs, they're pretty calm. I have noticed that the blood tangerines are a little more skittish and a little more spooked easily sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But the mandarins, they seem pretty calm.
Yeah, because
from what I've noticed.
I have the blood tremper female, but she's kind of skittish, and I have the mandarin stuff though too, and they just don't care. Once you open up their tub, it's just always... I've been hearing a lot of the stuff with, like, some tangerine lines have just been starting to act a little bit more skittish over time. I don't know if that has something to do with, like, line breeding.
I have a few crosses that the mandarin blood crosses, and it can go either way. A couple of them, like the males seem more calmer, and then the females are a little more skittish and a little more moody than I'd like. But other than that, I mean, each gecko is different.
Yeah, for sure.
They each have their own different personalities. And then, of course, you know, breeding season, they're a little more moody, or during the winter they don't want to be touched as much.
Yeah. Well, how about we move on to the next question now?
Okay.
All right, Sam. So, for the final question, I guess, do you have any advice to give, just overall, on breeding, or anything in that sort? Anyone who's listening to the podcast?
Advice: I would do your research. Make sure you know what you're breeding, what you're getting into. Make sure that you have all the setup. Realize that it is very costly to get into this industry and to have babies. Housing, especially, make sure you have, if you do, you know, tank setups, rack setups, enough housing to house all the babies and care for them properly. And feeding is a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
It is very expensive to feed babies. I think that a lot of people, you know, it is awesome to want to get into it and experience it, you know, producing your own things and creating the babies. It's like Christmas every day when they hatch. I still get excited after all this time. But just realize that it does take a lot of money to feed them. And I think what people don't realize is that, you know, it takes a lot of time as well. You're having to feed every day, or, you know, sometimes multiple times a day to make sure that they're getting enough to eat. And then it gets too overwhelming. So don't go too big too quick. Start off small and kind of go from there. And then also realize that you're not going to get rich quick doing this. I mean, most of us have second, third jobs, and this is a hobby. Even though we do sell geckos, you know, our money goes back into the geckos to be able to feed them and house them properly. And research as much as you can before you get into it.
Yeah, a lot of research.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, Sam, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode. I think it was really awesome. And, Sam, you should just tell everyone how long you've been breeding, too. Just, you know, people get a feel on how much information you actually have.
Well, I wouldn't really consider myself breeding for as long as I found them. I mean, I have, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So I still consider myself new at this, but I have been doing this for 13 years. But I mean, there's always something new that you're learning every day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you have to be open to advice.
Yep.
What works for you may not work for someone else, but then you can entertain the idea of trying to apply it to what you're doing in breeding, too. So always be open to advice and try not to shut down, you know, when someone gives you that advice, because you never know, it may be helpful down the road, too. So I always like new ideas and people, you know, kind of bouncing stuff off me, letting me know their experience, because I learned from others' experience as well as mine. I mean, that's kind of what we're all in the community for, is to support each other and be there for each other.
Yep. Couldn't have said it any better.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you on, and I hope we can have you on another episode of the podcast. Even I think this is number 4 for the episodes, but I think it's something really fun to just continue and have new people and old people in the hobby come back and just listen to it, and it's just kind of, you know, it's fun. I enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely grow together.
Yep. Well, alright, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you have an amazing day or night. I'll see you guys in the next episode.